What kind of billionaire places his future in the hands of a complete stranger? And what kind of woman walks in and disrupts everything he's built? When Bramston Luca boldly promised to marry the next woman who entered the room, he had no idea that she would be homeless. He never anticipated his career, his past, or his heart unraveling before her eyes. What began as a reckless dare soon spiraled into a scandal that threatened to destroy everything. Stick around until the end. What she does next will leave even the man who gave her everything speechless. Before we delve into this story, where are you watching from? Don't forget to subscribe and like for more. It had been one of those days. Endless meetings, back-to-back calls, and deadlines looming over him. Bramston Luca felt the weight of it all pressing on his chest, so he slipped out of the office for some fresh air, hoping to clear his mind. The familiar noise of New York City greeted him, but it didn't bring the usual comfort. He needed to talk, to unload. So he dialed Tom Radford, his best friend, the one person he trusted completely. They met at a quiet restaurant, the soft hum of the city outside creating a sense of isolation. Tom, ever the talkative one, rambled on about some business venture, but Bramston was hardly listening. His thoughts were miles away. His fingers traced the rim of his glass of wine, but his gaze was fixed somewhere beyond the restaurant, lost in a sea of thoughts. Tom noticed right away the familiar look in his friend's eyes, the one that spoke volumes even when Bramston said nothing. "You've got that look again," Tom said, his voice lowering. Bramston sighed, attempting to brush it off, claiming he was fine. But Tom knew better. He'd seen it all before. After much coaxing, Bramston finally spoke, his voice tinged with frustration. "It's the legacy. Everything else is fine. The business is thriving. But the legacy..." He trailed off, eyes distant. "There's no one to continue it. My father passed the company to me, and his father to him. But there's no one after me." His words hung in the air, thick with the weight of responsibility. Bramston Luca, the billionaire who had conquered empires and fearlessly dominated the world of finance, was struggling with something he couldn't fix with money: his legacy. "You have a very smart daughter, Rachel," Tom said, his voice gentle, trying to ease the tension. Bramston scoffed, his expression hardening as he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His voice rose slightly, loud enough to make a few heads turn in the quiet restaurant. "It's not the same," he snapped, rubbing his temple. Tom could feel the stress radiating from his friend, the pressure building with every passing second as the sounds of clinking forks and quiet conversations echoed around them. Bramston forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The legacy, the company, they need a male heir, someone to carry the name forward," he muttered, his voice betraying the burden that had been weighing on him for so long. Tom shook his head in disbelief. "It's 2025, Bramston. Who still thinks like that? Women can handle an empire just as well as men." Bramston's eyes darkened, and his voice dropped to a bitter murmur. "Tell that to my father's will. She grows up, marries some guy, and hands over the company to him out of love. Nah, not going to happen." Tom saw the sadness in his friend's eyes, the deep ache that had been festering there ever since he'd failed at maintaining his relationship with Loretta, his obsession with the family name clouding everything else. The weight of that legacy, the impossible standard set by his father, was tearing him apart. Then, without warning, Bramston set his wine glass down with a determined force. His eyes sparked with a new kind of resolve. "I'm done waiting for things to fix themselves," he said, his voice taut with a strange excitement. Tom's eyes widened in surprise, but he didn't have time to ask what was going on before Bramston flashed a grin. "Let's make things interesting," he said. Tom, still processing, leaned in. "What do you mean?" he asked. Bramston's grin widened, his voice low but confident. "A bet," he replied. Bramston stood up, his presence commanding attention. He looked around the restaurant, his voice steady and resolute as he declared, "The next woman who walks through that door, I will marry her." His words hung in the air, and the entire room fell silent. Eyes turned toward him, some in shock, others unsure if he was serious, and a few already reaching for their phones, eager to capture the moment. Tom, who had been casually sipping his drink, choked, the liquid spilling from his mouth as he gasped in disbelief. "What's wrong with you, man?" he muttered, tugging at his shirt as if trying to somehow make Bramston sit back down and reconsider his absurd statement. But Bramston was unshaken, his eyes fixed on the door. "I've tried logic," he said, a slight smirk curling at the edge of his lips. "Now, I want something unpredictable." His words were barely out before the door swung open. Time seemed to slow as a figure stepped into the restaurant. Not the polished socialite or high-powered professional the crowd might have expected, but a woman, her tangled dark hair falling around her face, her clothes worn and smudged with dirt. She looked like she didn't belong here, and every person in the restaurant seemed to know it. She wasn't here to mingle with the elite. She was here with an intention far different, probably to beg for leftovers, if anything. Gasps rippled through the room, and Tom's gaze flickered between the woman and Bramston, the gravity of the situation setting in. Security immediately moved toward her, clearly prepared to escort her out, but before they could make a move, Bramston's voice cut through the tension. "Wait!" he called out, his voice ringing across the quieted restaurant. All eyes turned to him, the air thick with anticipation. "I invited her," he added, his words firm and final. The murmurs stopped, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Bramston walked toward the woman, ignoring the shocked stares, the whispers that followed him. He approached her with a calm, deliberate step. She stood frozen, her eyes wide, filled with a silent kind of resilience, as if the weight of her life had been etched in every line on her face. He stretched out his hand toward her, offering it with a smile that was both genuine and welcoming. "Good evening," he said, as if she were someone of great importance. Bramston stood tall, extending his hand to the woman with the worn clothes, his gaze unwavering. "I'm Bramston Luca. Would you care to join me for dinner?" Rosalie stared at him, her expression a mix of disbelief and confusion. Her eyes flickered to the security guard still gripping her arm tightly, as though she were some kind of criminal. She then looked back at the man in the tailored suit, his hand outstretched, offering her something she hadn't known she needed. Her voice, rough from the cold, barely escaped her lips. My name is Rosalie." Bramston nodded, as if he were savoring the sound of it. "A beautiful name," he said softly. She hesitated, her rough, calloused hand trembling as she placed it in his, the contrast between their hands sharp and striking. Behind them, the security guard stood awkwardly, his grip loosening only at Bramston's command. "Let her go," Bramston said firmly, his voice brokering no argument. The guard obeyed without question, leaving Rosalie to stand free, though still uncertain of what was unfolding. Across the city, in a chic Manhattan salon, Loretta Bramston sat, casually chatting with a friend. Her conversation was interrupted by snippets of gossip floating from nearby tables. Her ears pricked at the mention of her ex-husband's name. She turned to listen more closely, but the words that followed made her freeze. "Did you hear? Bramston Luca caused a scene with a homeless woman at the Riverstone Bistro." Her hand instinctively reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she opened the news app. As the headline appeared on the screen, Loretta's heart sank. "Billionaire Bramston Luca causes stir with homeless woman at Riverstone Bistro." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Oh God, what did you do now?" she whispered under her breath, her world shifting as she stared at the screen, unable to look away. At Bramston's mansion, Rosalie sat on the edge of a grand chair, a plate of food placed before her, but she didn't touch it. She stared at the meal, her mind racing. Finally, she broke the silence. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice guarded, as if bracing herself for some kind of game. Bramston leaned forward, his expression serious, eyes fixed on hers. "I want to marry you," he said, his tone so earnest it caught her off guard. Rosalie stood up abruptly, her heart pounding. She grabbed her bag, a reflexive action as if preparing to flee. "I'm not interested in whatever game you're playing with me," she snapped, her voice hard, yet shaky with disbelief. Bramston moved quickly, stepping toward her and gently taking her arm, his grip firm, yet not threatening. "It's not a game, Rosalie," he said, his voice softening as he gazed into her eyes. "I made a promise to myself. When you walked through that door, I knew I wanted you. I want to marry you." Rosalie's eyes narrowed, disbelief and suspicion flashing across her face. Who would settle for a homeless woman they just met an hour ago? She thought to herself. The weight of her life, the struggles she had faced, surged within her. No one had ever offered her something without expecting something in return. She didn't trust easily. Life had taught her that. Every good thing came with a price, and that price was always steep. What was his price? What did he really want from her? As much as his words seemed sincere, the walls she had built around herself were not easily torn down. Loretta quickly typed a message, her fingers flying over the keys as she reached out to Tom, Bramston's best friend. She needed confirmation, needed to know if what she had heard was really true. Moments later, his reply came, confirming her worst fear. Bramston was serious about marrying the stranger. Loretta stared at the screen, her mind racing. Was this a fleeting impulse, or was Bramston genuinely acting out of desperation? Could love at first sight really be the reason behind this decision, or was there something deeper at play? Rosalie was shown to a special room in the mansion, a vast space with a large, inviting bed, fresh clothes, and a delicate bottle of perfume placed neatly on the dresser. But as she lay there, the softness of the bed did nothing to calm her restless mind. She couldn't sleep. Nothing about this made sense. Just hours ago, she had been homeless, fighting for scraps, and now she was here, in a mansion, being treated like royalty. She couldn't understand how everything had changed so quickly. The uncertainty gnawed at her. When morning arrived, she finally made her way downstairs. The smell of breakfast filled the air, and there, sitting at the table, was Bramston, waiting for her. She walked over, took a seat, and stirred her tea, her thoughts heavy. Finally, she couldn't hold it in any longer. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. Bramston looked at her, his expression steady. "It's a vow," he replied, his voice calm, but there was something more in his eyes. "But now, it's more than just that." Rosalie's brows furrowed, still trying to make sense of it all. To her, it felt like something was off. A vow was just words, something fleeting, but this situation seemed far more complicated. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his actions than he was letting on. Every step, every gesture felt calculated, and it left her with more questions than answers. She wasn't ready to trust him, not yet. Rosalie knew she couldn't just settle into this new life without a sense of control over her own space. The idea of moving into Bramston's world, with its luxury and constant attention, felt suffocating. She wasn't ready to surrender so easily to a life she didn't understand. So, she made a request. A modest apartment, something that felt like her own, away from the overwhelming opulence of Bramston's mansion. She wasn't comfortable with the speed at which everything was moving, the way he seemed to be pushing her into a new reality that didn't feel like hers. Bramston, to her surprise, respected her wishes. He found her a small, fully furnished apartment near Millennium Park. It wasn't flashy, but it was comfortable and safe, a quiet space where she could breathe. A wardrobe appeared, tailored to her tastes, and etiquette lessons, gently offered, never forced, helped her navigate this strange world she was now a part of. Still, Rosalie kept her distance. She wasn't one to jump into anything too quickly, especially when she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. She spent her mornings walking alone, her afternoons reading in quiet cafes, and her nights thinking about everything that had happened in such a short amount of time. The world she had known seemed so distant now, and she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Bramston's intentions than he was telling her. Meanwhile, the headlines wouldn't leave her alone. Every day, a new story appeared. Billionaire walks the edge. New mystery woman in Bramston Luca's life. Is Rosalie the next Cinderella, or is this the ultimate scam? Loretta saw every one of them. Each article twisted in her chest, a sharp pang of jealousy and fear that she couldn't ignore. She had watched her husband, Bramston, fall out of love with her years ago, but never like this. She hadn't seen him this animated in years, not even when their daughter Rachel was born. And now, here he was, chasing after a woman he barely knew, as if she were his salvation. He was ready to hand over everything he had worked for, everything he had guarded with an iron fist, to a mystery woman, someone who had walked into his life out of nowhere. It hurt Loretta more than she could admit. It felt like betrayal, like a loss that she had no control over. The reality of it all crushed her slowly, breaking her heart bit by bit. Loretta couldn't shake the thought of Rosalie. She had been watching her, quietly tracing her movements. That evening, Loretta found herself outside Rosalie's apartment building. She had followed her from a distance, watching as Rosalie returned from a jog, the fresh air clearly helping to clear her thoughts. It was then that Rosalie caught sight of someone, though she couldn't immediately place who it was. Her instincts told her she was being followed, but the figure remained just out of focus. As Rosalie began to close the door to her apartment, a voice called out, "Rosalie, can we talk?" Rosalie froze, startled and slightly uneasy. She opened the door cautiously to find Loretta standing there, her posture stiff, but her eyes betraying the intensity of what she had come to say. Despite the tension in the air, Rosalie, though hesitant, invited Loretta in. Something in her felt that there was more to this encounter than she realized. Once inside, Loretta wasted no time. "You're the woman my ex-husband met on a dare and now is willing to hand over everything for," she said, the words heavy with a mix of bitterness and resignation. Rosalie raised an eyebrow, a tightness in her chest. "So, you came here to mock me, to treat me like some charity case?" she asked, her voice edged with frustration and suspicion. Loretta shook her head, her expression softening. "No," she replied, surprising herself with the honesty in her words. "I came to help you understand what you're getting involved with. If this is real, if you really think this is the life you want, then you deserve to know the full picture." Rosalie listened quietly as Loretta began to speak, her voice strained but steady. Loretta told her about Bramston, about his obsession with legacy, and how that obsession had cost them everything. She spoke of how it had destroyed their marriage, fractured their family, and ultimately left their daughter Rachel caught in the middle of it all. Loretta didn't try to tear Bramston down, didn't speak of him with hate or anger. Instead, she spoke from a place of understanding, recounting how the very thing that had once brought them together was now the source of their downfall. Rosalie could hear the pain in her voice, could see the cracks in Loretta's composure as she spoke of the years lost, the love gone cold. Loretta's eyes welled with tears, but she held them back, refusing to let them fall. When Loretta finished, she stood up, looking at Rosalie with a mixture of sadness and quiet strength. "I don't blame you, Rosalie," she said softly, her voice breaking slightly. "But you need to be careful. This isn't just a passing storm. There's more at stake here than you realize." With that, Loretta turned and walked toward the door, her words lingering in the air. Rosalie stood still, her hands trembling, the reality of what Loretta had said sinking in. This wasn't a fairy tale anymore. There were consequences, and Rosalie was beginning to understand just how deep they ran. Rosalie stood by the window, phone pressed to her ear, her heart pounding as she listened to the dial tone. When Bramston answered, his voice calm but alert, she didn't waste time. "We need to talk," she said quietly. He could hear the heaviness in her voice and didn't ask questions. Within the hour, he was at her apartment, breathless from urgency, eyes scanning her face the moment she opened the door. She stepped back to let him in, barely meeting his gaze. "I can't do this," she said, her voice soft but firm. He froze in place, his expression shifting from concern to confusion. "What happened?" he asked, though part of him already feared the answer. Rosalie turned toward him, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. "Your ex-wife came to see me. She wasn't cruel, just broken. She didn't yell or accuse, she just wanted me to understand what I'm walking into." Bramston ran a hand over his face, exhaling slowly, but Rosalie continued before he could speak. "You have a daughter, Bramston. You have a past, an entire life that's still raw. And now I'm here, like some stranger dropped into the middle of it all. This world, your world, I don't belong in it, and I don't want to be the reason anyone else gets hurt." She looked at him, eyes full of conflict. "I've spent so many years trying to survive, just get through each day. Now you want me to step into this life, this image, and pretend I fit like I was made for it. But I can't pretend." Bramston stepped closer, his voice thick with emotion. "Then don't," he said. "Don't pretend. Just be who you are, Rosalie. That's who I saw the moment you walked through that door. That's who I need." His voice cracked slightly, the weight of everything they were both feeling pressing between them. "You think I don't know how messy this is? I do. But I also know what it feels like to have everything and still feel completely empty. You didn't crash into my life. You showed up and gave it meaning." For the first time, Rosalie didn't pull away. She stood there, uncertain, but still, listening to the truth in his voice. It was well past 2 a.m., and Bramston was still in Rosalie's apartment. They hadn't said much in the last hour, just sat in the quiet, the weight of their earlier conversation still hanging in the air. He hadn't wanted to leave, not yet. For once, the stillness felt grounding, not hollow. Just as he leaned back, his phone vibrated on the table beside him. He glanced at the screen. It was Samuel, his personal assistant. The late hour made his chest tighten. He answered quickly, his voice low. "What is it?" Samuel didn't hesitate. "Sir, you need to see the headlines. It's everywhere. Blogs, finance sites, social media." Bramston stood, suddenly alert. "What kind of headlines?" he asked, already dreading the answer. "They're painting a very different picture," Samuel said cautiously. "They've got photos, timelines. They're suggesting this entire relationship with Rosalie is a setup, that you're funneling company funds for personal use. Her apartment, her wardrobe, the security detail, even the dinner at Crown and Banner last week. They're calling it a misuse of resources, claiming she's playing you." Bramston's jaw clenched. "So they're calling her a con?" Samuel hesitated. "Some are. Others are calling it reckless leadership. There's speculation this could trigger a board inquiry. This isn't just gossip. It looks like someone's trying to push you out." Bramston's eyes flicked toward Rosalie, still seated on the couch, unaware of the storm brewing. His mind raced. This wasn't just a scandal. It was a calculated move. Someone wanted him out, and they were using Rosalie to make it happen. His world was shifting fast, and he knew the next steps would either protect everything he'd built or tear it all down. Bramston stood at the head of the long, polished table in the boardroom, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The room was packed with cold, calculating faces, board members who once supported him but now seemed eager to tear him down. A handful of journalists lined the back of the room, their cameras clicking in rapid succession, capturing every moment for the world to see. Outside, A throng of reporters had gathered, eager to pounce on every word spoken in that room. They called him incompetent, unworthy of the position, and today he was here to defend himself, to make sure they knew that they were wrong. "I've heard your accusations," Bramston began, his voice steady but tinged with frustration. "I didn't misuse company funds. Every penny spent came from my personal account. This is not about money. This is about people questioning my integrity, my ability to lead. The chaos you're all accusing me of. It was brought here by those who want to see me fail, not by the decisions I've made." The room was silent for a moment, but then one board member sneered, his tone dripping with disdain. "You've made a mockery of our legacy, Bramston. You've risked everything we've built for some personal experiment." Bramston's jaw tightened. "I built this legacy," he shot back. "And maybe you've forgotten, but it was built on taking risks, on doing things that others wouldn't dare to do. I'm still doing that." Before anyone could respond, the door to the boardroom swung open. Heads turned as Rosalie walked in, her steps confident but measured. There was a collective gasp, followed by the relentless click of cameras capturing her entrance. She paused for a moment, taking in the room, the weight of the eyes on her. One of the women at the table, her voice dripping with judgment, spoke up. "This is a board meeting, not a charity case. She doesn't belong here." Bramston's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. Without hesitation, he turned toward the woman. "Don't ever speak of her that way," he said, his voice firm and unwavering. "Rosalie deserves respect, and she will get it, whether you like it or not." Rosalie stepped forward, her presence commanding attention, her gaze sweeping the room. She took a deep breath, then spoke, her voice calm but powerful. "I know I wasn't invited, but I need to say this," she began. "I don't want Bramston's money. I don't want his empire. I didn't ask for him to pull me from the shadows, but he did. And for weeks, I kept thinking that he would change his mind once he saw who I really was. But he didn't. He just kept showing up, not because of some foolish notion of fixing things, but because he believes in me." There was a brief silence, then she continued, her words cutting through the tension in the room. "I'm not the fairy tale you wanted, and I'm not going to pretend to be something I'm not. But I am honest. I've slept on sidewalks. I've gone hungry. I've been invisible. And I'd rather go back to that life than stand here and let you tear him apart for loving someone who didn't come from a country club. So, if you're going to criticize him, then do it for something real. But don't ever question the man who's been willing to stand by me when no one else would." The room was thick with silence as her words settled. No one spoke for a long moment, and in that silence, Rosalie's resolve echoed, louder than any of the accusations they'd thrown at Bramston. Bramston stood there, his gaze focused on the floor for a moment before he looked up at the boardroom full of cold faces. His voice was low but steady. "I admit, at first, this was all just a bet. I promised myself I would marry the next woman who walked through that door, but I didn't expect it to change everything. I didn't expect her to be someone who wouldn't put herself above anyone else, who would see me not for the empire I built, but for who I really am." His eyes shifted to Rosalie, who stood beside him, her presence both grounding and empowering. "I thought this was about legacy, about continuing a name, but she showed me that it's about more than that. She didn't just change my world, she made me see what really matters." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. Bramston's expression hardened as he continued. "But then Rosalie walked into my life. She's everything I didn't know I needed, and I won't apologize for that." After a long pause, the oldest board member cleared his throat. "This isn't just about you, Bramston. You've put everything at risk, your legacy, your company." He trailed off, unable to finish. Bramston nodded slowly. "I know, but I've made a decision. If I'm to stay in this role, I will step back from day-to-day operations. I'll appoint a co-director, someone who understands the value of legacy and leadership, but also knows what it means to put people first. He turned to look at the board members, his voice firm. I'm appointing my daughter Rachel to take on this role. The boardroom fell silent, a mix of shock and disappointment in the air as they processed his decision. Some exchanged glances, clearly uneasy with his choice. Bramston didn't flinch. I trust Rachel. She's my legacy now. As the vote passed, the room continued to simmer with tension, but the decision was made. In the weeks that followed, the wedding between Bramston and Rosalie took place in a simple ceremony, far removed from the spotlight. It wasn't grand or glamorous. There were no cameras, no flashing lights, just family and friends. Bramston stood at the altar with Rosalie, their vows simple but meaningful. I do, Rosalie whispered, her voice trembling slightly as she made the decision to join him not just in name, but in life. Tom, who had been by Bramston's side throughout it all, rubbed his head in disbelief, muttering to himself, I didn't know it would lead to this. He had never imagined that this bet would turn into a love story. But there it was. Everything had changed, and there was no turning back. Rosalie, now more confident in her own skin, returned to her dream job at the women's shelter. She wasn't just a survivor anymore, she was a force for change. She started a program to help other women like herself, giving them the tools and support to rebuild their lives. Bramston stood beside her every step of the way, fully supportive of her mission. Together, they launched the Rosalie Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to providing job training and transitional housing for women who had been through what Rosalie had. It wasn't just about her past anymore. It was about giving others the chance to write their own stories. For the first time, both of them knew what it meant to live with purpose, to walk forward together, not as separate entities, but as a united force, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Bramston had spent years building his empire, but the one thing that weighed most heavily on him, far more than the billions he had accumulated, was the idea of legacy. The pressure to have a male heir to carry on the family name and empire had consumed him, and Loretta, as his wife, had always known this. The struggle had been subtle at first, buried under their high-profile lifestyle and the endless pursuit of success. But as the years went by, it became clearer that the one thing Bramston wanted more than anything was someone to continue his legacy, and Loretta couldn't provide that. She had always been focused on her career, her modeling, her image, believing that her personal success and independence were what mattered most. But when the pressure mounted for them to have a child, a son who could take over the family business, Loretta was adamant that she wouldn't sacrifice her career for motherhood. She couldn't bear the thought of giving up her career for something as mundane as pregnancy, something that would inevitably interfere with her modeling career. She had no interest in becoming a stay-at-home mom or even trying to balance both her career and a family. And so, despite Bramston's insistence, Loretta made it clear that she wasn't willing to try, to give him what he so desperately wanted, a male heir. Bramston realized that if he couldn't have the legacy he dreamed of, he would have to leave the life he had known for something that might allow him to find peace. When Bramston finally left, it wasn't just because Loretta couldn't give him a child. It was because she couldn't even meet him halfway. Couldn't see past her own ambitions to recognize the importance of the family they had built together. His heartache wasn't just about the lack of an heir, but about the years of trying to build something that didn't matter to the woman he had loved. In the end, Loretta's decision not to try to save their marriage, not to put the family first, led to the unraveling of everything. Bramston's departure, while painful, was not just a reaction to Loretta's refusal to give him a son. It was about the deeper realization that his empire had come at the cost of his personal happiness, and that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than leaving a legacy. It was in this search for something more real, something beyond status, that he eventually found his way to Rosalie. But the damage of his past, the years spent trying to build a legacy that no one, not even Loretta, seemed to understand, had already set the course for everything that followed. As time passed, Loretta came to terms with the consequences of her choices. She saw how Bramston had moved on, how he had found someone who understood him in ways she never could. She could no longer blame him for what happened between them. She had been the one who placed her career above everything else, the one who refused to compromise for the sake of love and family. It wasn't until she saw Bramston and Rosalie together that she understood what real love looked like, something that transcended money, status, and empire. One day, Loretta found herself outside the Rosalie Initiative office, holding an envelope. The decision to donate was difficult, but it felt like the right step toward redemption. Inside the envelope, she wrote a simple note. "I didn't see it clearly before. I acted out of jealousy, driven by my own insecurities. But I see now that Bramston was never the villain I made him out to be. He is just a man who wanted to love and be loved. You didn't just change his life, Rosalie. You changed mine. Thank you for helping him find peace and for showing me that there is more to life than chasing a career." Loretta left the note inside the envelope, handed it over, and walked away with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. She knew she couldn't undo the past, but she had made a choice to move forward, no longer bound by the past mistakes, but with a new understanding of what truly mattered. Bramston and Rosalie had their own story now, one built on mutual respect, love, and the freedom to be who they were. Loretta had made her peace with that. While her journey with Bramston had ended, Rosalie's presence in his life had brought him the happiness that had eluded him for so long. She, too, had learned that sometimes the greatest success comes not from holding on to what we think we need, but from letting go and embracing the unexpected. Would you be willing to sacrifice your career for love and family, just like Loretta was asked to do for Bramston's legacy? Now we'd love to hear from you. What did this story mean to you? If you enjoyed the journey of Rosalie and Bramston, comment 100 below and tell us which country you're watching from. And if you believe that love is worth fighting for, even when the odds are impossible, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes it's not where you come from that defines you, it's where you dare to go.